My name is Staniland and I'm a climate punk because I've gone against the grain to challenge my industry into becoming a better one.
Hi, this is Climate Punk. My name is Thomas Kolster, and I am behind the microphone to find hopefully new, exciting answers to the climate emergency that we see all of ourselves in. So I'm talking to climate punks all around the world, hopefully to inspire you to find the climate punk within yourself. This episode, I'm talk to quite a different climate punk. Brett Staniland, he's a model, a TV reality star, but he also got a PhD in public health. So welcome, Brett, to Climate Punk. I'm so happy you could join us here today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So Brett, model, TV reality star on Love Island. You know, can people take your sort of advocacy for sustainable fashion seriously with that background?
Yeah, it's something, doing that show obviously was a massive career risk. I'd been a model for 5 or 6 years and really carved away into like the luxury and sustainable fashion industries. Was a massive sustainable fashion advocate already. And it was one of the pivotal reasons why I would do the show. It was the relationship with the fast fashion partner. So whilst I was going through the casting process and all of that, I actually got the contract and went through it with one of my friends who's also a model, but a former lawyer. And as I look, find a way where I can do this show, but I'm not going to be supporting any fast fashion. I'm not taking part in any of their marketing schemes. And, you know, it was basically to protect my credibility with the show. So I was the first contestant to go on the show and not accept any of the clothing. I took a suitcase full of my own clothes, some small independent sustainable brands from London too, and tried to really use that to platform my voice and, you know, what I stand for, my morals and values.
How did the producers of the show react to this?
I remember early on, the producers were asking me a lot of questions, you know, to asking me what sort of clothes I would take and why I did what I did and why I thought it was important. But I noticed pretty early on in the show that once I was there, I felt quite alone and quite ostracized from like the general zeitgeist of like general stuff, normal stuff that people do there. But it was nice to open up those conversations to producers. I'm sure a lot of them just weren't expecting it at all. But just the way the show is just so intertwined with fast fashion, it was super hard to unravel. But the reception at first was a little bit hostile and a little bit, you know, why do you feel like you're better than us? Or it was kind of that. It was like a really weird dynamic. But then once I got talking about how passionate I am about it and why I do it, they kind of came on board. And, you know, after, especially once I'd come home and back to England, when the producers would call me after that, they were really interested in the work I was doing, wanted to know more about it. So it was like a slow burn. It was an ongoing process, but it definitely had a few hiccups along the way.
So you think your passion sort of convinced them, or did you feel you sort of have to always explain yourself why you didn't do what everybody else was doing?
Yeah, I felt a lot of the time, in months after I came home, I was still trying to explain myself. Because of the way the show's set up, you don't really get a chance to really give a good character reference. And they're in charge of all the edit, so you don't really know what's being aired. And I remember coming home and people just did not understand me at all. So it wasn't until I kind of regained my own narrative that I was able to show people who I was, what I did for work, and like why I did it. But it was the challenge that I was kind of signing up for. Like one of the main appeals for the show for me was that, as you said before, like we're very much in a bit of an echo chamber with sustainability, with climate change, especially as it pertains to fashion as well. So for me, it was like the main appeal and the attractiveness was to be so far out of our echo chamber that we actually now have a place where we can speak to so many people who probably don't know what waste colonialism is, don't know how polyester is made, or how wool is made. So it was just, I knew I was signing up for very difficult conversations, but ultimately that was what I wanted.
Obviously, you have quite a following on social media. Did you feel there was a pushback as well? Did you get any negative remarks, negative comments?
Even when I always try to empower people to change rather than shame them. I think shame we can reserve for some big corporations and specific individuals. But for me, it was about empowering people to see in like what we do and you can do it too. But again, online, you know, I remember the abuse for a good few months was pretty harsh. People who would just outright want to attack you.
How can we make this cool? How can we make sustainable fashion cool? Obviously, we are up against multi-billion-dollar advertising and marketing budgets, using models as yourself to sort of promote a certain way, a certain lifestyle. So how do we make that other narrative cool?
There's going to be some people who will be captured by the sustainable elements, and that will be enough for them. But I think for the most part, it just simply needs to be as good as everything else on the market, more wearable, and then it so happened to be sustainable or more responsible than what exists. I think that's the best way that we can capture a consumer. The new logo mania for me will be looking at the care label and seeing where it was made, what it's made from, who made it. And that's how strong that story is what's going to capture people, so that when someone asks them where their clothes are from, they get to tell that story to their friends. And that's going to be what's cool.
Obviously, saying no to a certain client isn't really the thing you want to do as a model. Usually you'd just be very happy if someone picks you at that casting. How do you feel that has affected your career?
Yeah, it's such a competitive industry and extremely saturated. There's basically always someone younger and hotter than you. So yeah, immediately I think once I said that I wouldn't be doing any fast fashion or high street, no e-com, no ad campaigns, you're signing up for a lot less work and a lot less money pretty much immediately. It's something that's really challenging, and I'm lucky enough that some of my friends now in the industry will say, oh, I got optioned for a Shein campaign and I've told them that I won't do it, which is great to hear. And it's nice that the modeling agencies are also accepting of that, because ultimately your job as a model is to make your agency money. They're going to make commission from your work. So when you start turning down work, they're losing out on money that they would have got usually. So it's a really challenging thing to balance. And it comes from a massive place of luxury for me, because I had another career that I could fall back on at that point. Going through university all the way, when I'd finished my PhD, there was a job waiting for me if I wanted it. And so then the modeling industry became a little bit take it or leave it. My heart was so invested in fashion, but there was jobs there now at that point that I could just be like, look, it's not for me. And I'm okay if I don't make any money.
But couldn't this also be something that would make you stand out as a model?
Exactly. So like there was a point, the clear defining point. I remember the meeting I had with my bookers was, look, if I'm going to do this as a job, I want to be proud of the work that I'm doing. And so now with how strong and loud my voice was about these brands, I was like, if a brand comes in and wants to work with me, I don't want them just to go on the website and say, we want the white guy with dark brown hair and blue eyes. I want them to say, we want Brett because he stands for what we stand for. And I want them to specifically want me. And that's kind of where I know it wouldn't happen overnight. And it was something that you build over a course of many years. But it was something that I thought, as you say, it was something that would work in my favor. And I might have been early, but I didn't think I'd be wrong in the way that, you know, this is what's going to set me apart. And yeah, it might mean my earnings take a big dip at first and my exposure takes a big dip, but eventually it's going to be something that I'm going to be proud of. And I'll be able to look back in decades time and say, yeah, I did all that work and I'm really proud of it. And I'm happy even now to stand side by side with it.
And so what made you sort of open your eyes towards sustainable fashion? Because obviously through your job, through your work, you are exposed to fashion, you are exposed to luxury brands, you are exposed to fast fashion brands. So what makes you suddenly stop and reflect? Do you remember that moment? Was there a specific moment? Was this something that came gradually?
Yeah, I was doing a big like kind of mix of brands at the time, and I remember doing e-com. I was doing an e-commerce shoot for like a high street brand, and I'd do like 3 or 4 days a week just shooting e-com in a studio. And over the course of a couple of years, I noticed, I remember the day where I looked around in the studio and thought, we used to shoot about 20 looks a day, and now we're doing about 40. And there's now more models in the studios. This is only for one brand. And then you look at the stock room and it is heaving with clothing, like heaving. You can't move for clothes. Imagine like a pig pen office floor, only all you can see is clothing on rails. And I remember that specific day, I was like, there's so much stuff in this room, and this is just one brand stuff.
What feeling came from that? Like seeing this like mountain of clothes in this sort of cramped space.
It made me really, it was a surprise to me, because I just couldn't imagine people buying this many clothes and wearing and owning this many clothes. As someone who grew up quite working class, and we fixed things when they broke and we passed things down, seeing a room full of clothing, like this much clothing, made me think people are actually buying all of this, like really, really regularly. And it was that realization, like, Jesus, like people really do buy a lot of clothing. And it was because it wasn't something I'd ever done. It was just like that, a bit of a surprise and a bit of a shock. That was one thing. And I think it was like the start of the overproduction and overconsumption thing going on in my head, which I didn't know the name for at the time. I started to look at the clothes and look at the lining and turn them inside out. And I'd noticed over the course of a couple of weeks that the clothing had started to become more and more plastic. So there was like those two things that had just been flipped on their head. And that was the thing that led me straight into a rabbit hole of production, consumption, and fabrics. And then that led me down the rabbit holes of supply chains and people. And I think the main thing that captured me more than anything was learning about people.
Do you think that's the sort of public health studies that also made you zoom in on people?
Yeah, my PhD I think it led me into thinking in certain ways around sustainability and around people. But it also, as soon as I started to look at like clothing factories and how things were dyed and washed and stuff like that, I really strongly, because my PhD is to do with cardiorespiratory illnesses and cardiovascular disease. So I quickly learned about the toxicity of chemicals, which were being inhaled, seeing rivers that were being, where toxic waste was being dumped out of textile factories, and then seeing kids washing those, seeing that water used to irrigate crops, those crops used to feed children, wash children, where people brush their teeth, where people defecate, all in the same body of water that is being impacted by a textile factory, as well as then looking at where our waste ends up, like landfill piles in Accra in Ghana, seeing that then get burned. And because it's plastic dominated clothing, it burns really thick, black, toxic smoke into the air, which degrades the air quality, which people then breathe in. And again, all these factors, I was just like, it's a public health nightmare working in the fashion industry or living in communities adjacent to fashion industry, like textile factories or dumping sites. It was a massive wake-up call. I'm really glad I had the knowledge from my PhD too, that I quickly realized how much of it was all kind of connected.
Do you feel this is a message that's easier for people to relate to than this sort of moral imperative?
This is one of the things I really am passionate about with my messaging around sustainability and around fashion, is that a lot of people will be connected to the planet. A lot of people are really connected to animals. And I think they are slightly more privileged things to be worried about. But I think that the human to human connection should be something that is the strongest in anyone. So when I connect a person who made clothes with the person who wore those clothes, I think that is where you get people who think, oh, they deserve to have a life that I've had too. Like, they deserve human rights. They deserve to live in safe and work in safe conditions. They deserve to have clean water. And when you connect a person with another person, I think that bond can then help change behavior. So I think it's that relatability, the human connection with people. And a lot of people don't realize, like, when you go into stores, the marketing and the merchandising is supposed to disconnect you from supply chains. When you walk into a store and you're just dominated by rails of clothing, you don't ever think that a person's made those things. You just think they just come out of a conveyor belt and a machine's made them. But there's people sat in factories thousands of miles away, most likely, that has made all those items of clothing. And so we need to get back to connecting the consumer with that person too.
We do give our audience an opportunity to ask a question using the hashtag #AskClimatePunk, and we only will have time for one question today. So the question is, what inspired you to protest against Pretty Little Thing, and how did you plan and execute it?
Yeah, so Pretty Little Thing's creative director at the time was a girl called Molly May Haig, and she's basically the most famous person to ever come from Love Island UK. And so both of those engines really work well together. So yeah, we got planning, a few friends, Venetia Lamanna and some of the girls from Eco Age and Clean Clothes Campaign and Labour Behind the Label. We got into a chat about how we could execute it, but we had to be very quiet because if they found out, they'd have shut us down straight away. And I remember it was on like a really cold, drizzly Wednesday night or Thursday night. We'd kind of got all assembled round the corner and we were hiding behind a little cinema and we could see the entrance. And we decided just to like plonk ourselves right in the doorway. We had all our signs. We realized they couldn't move us or anything like that. But it was pretty scary. I think being the only guy at the test too, I knew I had to throw my weight around a little bit. So I had to stand right in the doorway next to the security guards. I got shoved off the pavement a few times. But for me, it was just like such a massive opportunity to have just so many audiences. The queue is full of influencers that I knew would get their phones out. There was some really good, strong activists in the group of us. There was only about 12 or so of us. And yeah, it was Pretty Little Thing who embodied pretty much everything that's terrible with the industry. A mega influencer that comes from a mega show, which is all relied on fast fashion, creates fast fashion influencers over the years. And then me, who's against all of that. I think it was just a really good kind of blend of like the perfect opportunity to raise some noise. Luckily, it went really, really well. And I was really proud of the coverage that it got the next morning.
I think that was a perfect story to end this episode of Climate Punk with. What a punk act, and also lovely to see that in this balancing act between, hate and trolling and saying things should stay the way they are. And on the other side, the love and the support that you're getting, Brett. Keep going at it. And to all of you who are viewing here today, do follow Climate Punk. We will have many more people to talk to, and hopefully by having conversations like the one that we're having with Brett today, you can find the punk within yourself. So best of luck, and thank you so much, Brett.
Thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Cheers.